Welcome back to the Inviting Shift podcast, where we embrace our authentic, confident selves. And we do a lot of personal growth work. And when people ask me, what does personal growth work look like? Well, how do I know that I'm on the right track? How do I know that I'm getting there? Today, we're going to talk about 4 selves. Hang in there with me. These are the keys to knowing that you are on the right track of personal growth, in my opinion, and my friend Joanna, who will be here to speak with us. Joanna is a skilled facilitator in helping people look at their life stories in a brand new way, and she has found the results of her program have led to these 4 selves, and we'll even get a bonus self today. So tune in and hang on. You're going to love this. Well, welcome, Joanna. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm honored to be here with you.
Yeah, so Joanna's been on one of our other podcasts talking about wounds of girlfriends. If you want to see that, you can go back to episode 4 or 3. One of those. However, I wanted to talk to Joanna today because just the other day I was reading this article, this interview that she had done, and she was talking about these 4 selves and how it's like the basis of her program and how people really get to shift their mindset into rewriting their stories in a way that is empowering and feels good to them. And so that's why I brought Joanna on. I would love to know, Joanna, how did this come to fruition, the 4 selves?
I don't really even know. I was thinking about what are the benefits that I hear people say that they experience as a result of doing my life story writing course. And so, I was thinking about that. I'm like, oh, okay. And so this kind of summary of these 4 things, these 4 things. And so then when I wrote them down and I looked at it and I said, oh, they all start with self. And so I'm just going to call them the 4 selves. And, but so I don't really remember any, I kind of remember just looking trying to think in terms of like, what are the benefits for it? And so then the idea just came that it was that.
I love that it came around to that.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty more that people get out of it, but the more that I've thought about it and I really thought in terms of the definition of those 4 things, the more I've realized, it does sum it up pretty well.
Right. And tell people a little bit about what it is that you do so that we can understand how these came to fruition and why they're important.
Sure. Yeah. So I guide people through this process of looking back on their life and reclaiming their stories and looking at their life stories from a new perspective, one where they're seeking the lessons and the blessings and the wisdom that they've gained from their life experience. And looking back in this way, knowing that we all are flawed, we all have made mistakes, we have regrets, we have shame, we have guilt. And rather than say, I don't want to look at that, embrace those and look for how they helped make us who we are today, in addition to celebrating the joys, celebrating the stuff that was good. And so the course takes people on a journey of looking back on their life, not chronologically, but more kind of unpacking the significant memories that start coming up, looking again for what it is that they went through, how they overcame obstacles, and then shining the light on their strengths and their resilience and their good stuff.
I love that. Like the gold that we're not looking because we're too afraid to look back. I think that's one of the biggest things that we miss when we're kind of box up our past and put it in a closet, right? And that reminds me of Glennon Doyle in her book, Untamed. She has a chapter on what is true and beautiful. So like that's the reflective piece that I really love about your program is it's not just like what happened in my life, not just the chronological, here's, what happened, but it's more of a, how can I look back at this as almost like a love story of myself, right? This beautiful love journey of how I got from here to there and finding all the gold, because there's gold underneath all the stories that we're really scared of. One, we survived them. So there's got to be something that we've gotten out of them. So I love that you do this. So that we can get this all in a good amount of time, let's just get into the 4 selves. Which one do you want to start with?
All right. Well, let's start with self-awareness, because I think my guess is that people who are listening today are pretty much already, working, have had their plenty of experience with gaining self-awareness and have been probably in individual therapy, coaching, have done self-help, self-exploration, and recognize the benefits of self-awareness.
Beautiful. So what does it mean for you to be self-aware?
It's understanding yourself, understanding why you did what you did, understanding, why it is that you feel the way you do, but not from a perspective of judgment. Like, for example, there's one of my clients who's been through the program. She's in her late 70s, early 80s. She grew up in a time where women could not get a loan without their husband's signature. And she decided, after having some kids, she decided she wanted to go back to college and finish her degree. And she had this insight of what it is that she wanted to do with her life. And she was feeling really unfulfilled. And she was in a marriage that was not a great marriage. And her husband would not support her with going back to school. He would not, even though the funds were available to them, he did not want her to have the funds to go back to college. But she went to the bank and she asked the bank manager to get a loan, and he said, no, not without your husband's signature. Well, she responded so strongly, so insistent. She ended up getting the loan from the bank officer. And she's writing this story, and through this process is realizing something that was so apparent to all of us as we're hearing her story is, look at the strength that it took for her to stand up to the bank officer, to go after what it is that she wanted, to go against the odds really for that period in time. And she gained, and just through this process of writing it, whereas before she'd look back and she had a lot of resentment towards her former husband, resentment towards the bank officer, but she was not appreciating herself in that experience. And when she was able to see herself in that experience and what it is that she did, then she was able to notice, wow, I've been strong in these other areas of my life too. So that's this opportunity to start connecting the dots and see patterns of behaviors. And there's something about writing it down, what gets it out of our head and onto the page, that helps provide structure, that helps us see those patterns, which is, why I'm such an advocate of life story writing, whether you see yourself as an author or not. But here's an example of a woman, by doing that, by writing a story that she has shared over and over again, verbally, writing it down, she gained a self-awareness about her own strengths and capabilities.
Yeah, I find that when I'm journaling, I can write something down and I'll be like, Christina, is that really what you think? Is that like really how you see things? Because I also love writing, whether it's, your life story or even just journaling, you can get enough thoughts down. And I notice that the important thoughts are the ones that I keep repeating over and over again. And yet I can miss all of the gold in that. And I think for me, one of my biggest self-awareness things was probably in my 30s. I started learning that I was putting up walls around me, this quote unquote bitchiness that I had about me. And when I actually worked that through, I think I wrote about it for Woman Within for this organization that Joanna and I met through. Women Within, highly suggest it. But I went through it and I was like, well, but why did I do that? Well, because when I was young, I was in an unsafe environment, and being mean and nasty was how I kept people away from me. And if they were away from me, they couldn't hurt me. And so I learned how to honor, wow, what strength I had as a child to come up with some kind of my only defense mechanism as a little girl. And so I can be aware of that. Do I want to use that every day? No, I don't want to use that every day. So I can manage it, but I still honor it because I know that should I need that energy, I can whip it right out and bring it up and, protect myself. So there's parts of us that maybe we don't want to use every day, or that we are ashamed of how they came out in the past. But if we track them back, we could be like, well, of course, that's how I reacted to that. It only makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And by being willing to, go back and write this stuff down, take a look at it and see the patterns, these incredible things come up in terms of how we want to live our life in the future. Like one of the things that I learned about myself is, how I've played small, and recognizing, growing up in a home with an older sister who stuttered, and I had, a lot of energy. I was a really joyful child, and somehow I got the message, and I don't know how I got it. I'm not going to say I don't remember anything specific my parents saying to me, but somehow I believed I had to dumb it down, at least, within certain environments. And I loved acting and stopped at one point. I've told a story about this lots of times, so I won't go into detail about it, but stopped because someone was critical when I was in 4th grade of my acting. But as I've been writing, I've been in touch with this joy that I have in the play, the play of it. And I'm like, gosh, I want more of that in my life. So we get to see what we're missing through this process of self-awareness as we look back and say, I can bring more of that. In fact, I just signed up for an improv comedy class.
Oh, that's exciting. That's so exciting. Good for you.
I have no idea where it's going to go, but I just did.
Well, I love that because I think too often we have to know where it's going to go before we'll even try something. We have to have some kind of expectation. And I love that you looked back and were like, I'm really missing some play in my life. That's what I really want. And you're making it happen. That's very exciting. I'll have to get updates about that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So self-awareness is the first one. So being aware of self. How do we become aware of self? That is very interesting. And
tell me about you, Christina. Like, what processes do you use for your groups with helping people
around becoming more self-aware? It's really asking a lot of questions usually. And some of that is, could the opposite be true, is probably one of the best questions that I have about self-awareness, is that when people get stuck in that I'm not enough, I'm blah, 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 I'll ask them, but what if the opposite, what if you were enough? Like, what if you were perfectly enough exactly as you are? So it's more of a self-awareness to me is like a stretch of our perception. And I think that if you haven't done work before, it's really hard to see that what you think isn't necessarily true. It's hard to explain it for me all the time, but what I think isn't necessarily true. There's a lot of, there's some data, but most of it is stories that are happening in my head. And again, I love that you do this writing because I think as we write them down, I notice my self-awareness by these patterns, like, oh, I see. I make up judgments about people, and I assume, like the way I grew up, another big awareness was not everybody's out to get me. I mean, that's kind of how my family was when I was growing up. It was like, that person's doing that thing to anger me or to make me mad or, to be greedy or take something from me. It was like always about that other person and like me as the center of the universe. And when I could remove myself from the center of the universe and realize that people do things because they're trying to get what they want to, like that was like a huge awareness, like, wow, what they're doing has nothing to do with me. But that took a lot of self work, a lot of journaling, a lot of seeing how I was thinking, because it's hard when we're in it to like see how we're thinking. See, is it being negatively skewed? Is it being all about my not enoughness that I'm looking for evidence? Or I'm just making up stories, And so really getting down to what is data and what is the story I'm making up about that? And then going back to, why am I making up that story? Oh, right. I remember, because that's the way I was programmed to think the worst of everyone.
Yep, exactly. So much of all of this is based on what we were taught, what was modeled for us. So.
Yeah, our programming, all of those experiences and everything. Like that one person who said something horrible to you in 4th grade. Yikes.
And I just totally gave my power to him.
Yeah, and for the rest of your life, you were just gathering evidence to that, right? Like, oh, there's another time I messed up, and there's another time, you're right, I am not good at this. And so it's about realizing that we're writing the story, I think, is what the awareness is, and that we can change the story anytime, because the data can provide any story we want it to provide.
Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, can't get enough self-awareness either. That's one thing that I love that. I love those aha moments.
It's so tricky because they all hide in that shadow of ours, right? Like all those things that we don't want to believe that we actually show up that way, but we do sometimes. And I love how you said it's not about judgment, because it's not about judgment. It's about, if I really want to truly shift, I have to accept what is true right now. I have to accept how I'm showing up right now. I have to be able to see, yeah, this is where my starting point is, because I can't shift without that.
Right. Which, I mean, I think that's a good segue into the second self, which is self-compassion.
Yes, that is going to definitely be needed for some self-awareness.
Yeah, because our tendency is to go to the negative. Our tendency is when we start, I call it, and it's expression that's used, but in writing, oftentimes going down the rabbit hole. So we'll start writing about an event that, we think it's relatively neutral. And next thing we know, we're beating ourselves up about the way we showed up. We're starting to remember, oh, did I really do that? And so now we got to bring in the self-compassion and start realizing that we're human and we get to experience those feelings. You're a follower of Kristen Neff, and so am I. Her website, selfcompassion.org. And, she talks about the elements of self-compassion, mindfulness, shared humanity, realizing we're not alone in our experiences. We're all imperfect. And then being kind to ourselves, treating ourselves like we would treat a friend. So we've got to really build that muscle as we're looking back on these stories and catching ourselves as we go down that rabbit hole of beating ourselves up.
And it could be so challenging, right? I mean, especially when we're going down those stories, and maybe I'm writing about a story that has a lot of shame for me because I look back and cringe. And having compassion in that moment, it's a real choice. Like, it's a real choice. It doesn't come easy to me anyway. Like, it's a real, because I love to go to the shaming and blaming of myself. Like, I was taught that punishing myself would be a way that would be effective of changing my behavior. And it turns out that is not so effective at all. So having compassion is something that I used to have to it was hard for me to choose. It's a little easier now. And I think that that's what happens after we practice any of these skills.
And I think that it's a real advantage, like in your program where you're doing the coaching, with a group of people, then that experience when someone's sharing about something that's challenging for them, how often others are like, while that one person is doing their work, someone else benefits from it, because we do have so many shared experiences. And once we start shining light on it, we realize how we aren't alone at all. And it makes it easier to have compassion for ourselves when we realize like we're not the only ones.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I've had this just recently in the last couple of months is one person started working on self-compassion, which I usually go to the inner child for, because I think that if we can love on our little bits of ourselves, it's a lot easier than looking in the mirror if that's really hard for us sometimes. So once one person started doing inner child work, then all of them were like, oh, I could use that. I need more self-compassion. I don't know that there's anyone in the world that has like enough self-compassion, because this humaning thing is hard. It's and we act like there's supposed to be some kind of end point, but it's the journey. Like, I think that's the whole point of life. It's not about where you're going. It's like how you handle those everyday things that happen and build up, and how
Absolutely.
we accept ourselves and say, hey, it's okay. I mean, just because I know better doesn't mean I'm always going to do better.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I love it. Like with my live program where I've got the group as well, and they're sharing their stories, that same kind of experience can come up. And I see the growth, as the people go through the program and how they're writing and how they're reflecting on who they are and how they're having so much, there's so much more space for themselves as they're writing, but also the space for others. Once we get to that place of self-compassion for ourselves, then we can start feeling more compassion towards those people in our life who we have had challenging relationships with. And we can move into forgiveness, maybe not from the perspective of that what they did, not to let them off the hook by any means, but to find that peace for ourselves, to recognize again that we're all flawed and everyone's doing what they're doing. They're on their path. And so the compassion for ourselves opens up the ability for us to have compassion for others.
Yeah, I love that, because if I can understand that I do things that I don't like, I can also understand that other people are going to do things that I don't like, especially if I can accept that part and go, yep, that's just part of life. That's just how it goes. And everybody's doing their best.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. Yeah. So we have so far self-awareness and self-compassion. Those are really beautiful. What's the third one?
So the third one is self-appreciation. And, the concept of self-love for me has always been a hard one. I get into that. Do I really know how to do that? How can I get there? But self-appreciation has been an easier path for me in the process of life story writing. And because we have a tendency to look at what we did wrong more readily than look at what we did right.
Yes.
And so we don't want to appear vain or arrogant or self-absorbed when it comes to looking at the things that we've done right. But with self-appreciation, we're acknowledging what's good about ourselves, knowing again that we're all flawed, but allowing ourselves to feel good without being afraid that we're being over the top in terms of overly confident, overly conceited, too much. It's that, yeah, I can acknowledge that I did good. And
so many clients
have good qualities. All people have good qualities, just like all people are flawed. And so I can look for my good qualities too.
Yeah. So many clients go through this and they're like, it feels really uncomfortable for them. And I think especially for women, a lot of us were told not to show off or brag and we talked a little bit about this in the last podcast that we did with the girlfriend wounds, but we're not supposed to be big and showy, and yet we all have that inner child that wants to be seen and heard, right? Like I can remember my little girl dancing around and being told, just because you're in dance class doesn't mean that you should be showing off, or that's not appropriate and stuff. But then it became like, I'm allowed to say good things about other people, but never about me. And then we wonder why we have such a problem with self-appreciation or self-love. And it's like, because we were taught that it was not appropriate. Some of us were taught it was not appropriate to even say the good things. I make my clients, every time they check in, tell me what the big celebration was since we last met. And sometimes they're like, I don't know. I don't know. And it's like, yeah, you do. There's got to be something to celebrate, but we don't look at that. And like you said, we look at the negative and we'll remember that forever. We'll be like, oh, that one mistake I made. I mean, I can still pull stuff up when I'm going down my shame spiral. I can pull stuff up from the 4th grade and be like, yep, remember that thing I did? Yep, that's me. That's who I am. Instead of going, yeah, look at the millions of great things I've done though. And those are harder to remember for me.
Yeah. It's basically training ourselves to do positive self-talk. And we all want to be appreciated. And when we start to learn to appreciate ourselves, then we don't have the same need for getting that from others. And so we can, for me, like my own experience with it, I'll think, for example, there was this job interview where the odds against me getting this job were so high. I was confident. I wore a red blouse. I was in front of a panel of 12 people, and I stood up at one point, during the process. I just took charge of that interview, and I ended up getting that job. The long shot, I got it. And I look back in that, and I've told that story, to other people, like, oh, this happened. But what I have not dropped into until I started writing it is what I appreciate about myself with that, and how prepared I was, and how I imagined, I envisioned myself there. It's like all of the things that I did in order to show up, and I'm like, wow, I've got those qualities in me, and sometimes they show up more than others. But okay, I haven't seen that part of me lately. Let me bring a little bit of that in, So it's helping to remind ourselves of what we've done well.
Which is crazy, because when we do things wrong, we claim that. We're like, yeah, that's me. That's who I am. But when we do things right, we're just like, just luck, just kind of had a good day.
Yeah.
I got lots of help. Women are always willing to say, oh, it was my whole team. It wasn't just me. And, and that's how we kind of brush off those compliments. And I love this one. I want us to take in our compliments and start appreciating ourselves and going, yeah, I really kicked butt on that one. Be lovely.
Yeah.
This podcast is supported by Christina Smith Coaching as a service to get you to have more confidence and self-love. One way we do that is by bringing what we learn into our bodies, by lighting up our senses. Some people call these types of exercises rituals. I think they're really alignments. Something we do each day to align with what we truly want, rather than getting stuck in the default of trying to outrun what we don't. I bet you could use a little self-love ritual today, and there's a short quiz or survey to pick the best one for you. You can go to the link in the description to take the free quiz to get the self-love alignment that is right for you right now. You'll also get a download of 5 self-love rituals so you can switch it up and try one each day. Our little thank you for tuning into our podcast and into your own heart.
And what great role models, like for me with life story writing, many of the people who are doing it want to be seen, to share it with those who follow. They want to take charge of how they're going to be remembered. They want to leave a legacy, something about who they are to those people who follow. And so what incredible role modeling to be able to do this, writing about ourselves from a place of self-appreciation, and with that shared humanity, with these other aspects that go along with it, so that we're not being off-putting, brag, 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 but to be able to say how it felt to do something that we feel proud of, to do something that we feel good about, and then to be role modeling that it's okay to be self-confident.
Yes, I love that idea that we're actually showing future generations how to really stand up and be like, hey, look, this is the good balance between it. Yes, I did all these things. I'm really proud of myself. I mean, it doesn't mean that I have to overshadow anybody else, but it just means that I'm allowed to claim what I've done for myself, just like I'm willing to claim the negative. So why can't I claim these beautiful gold pieces out of myself instead of just the muck and just the stuff I don't want to see? So I love self-appreciation.
And you said the key thing is that there's that balance, because in life story writing, they're also sharing the things that didn't go well and how they made it through it or what the impact was. So there's enough variety of the stories so that it gives a balance to whoever's going to be reading it to see that this person is a whole human being.
Yeah, beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that they actually appreciated their life. I mean, who wants to read a life story about someone who just hates themselves all the time and only talks about the negative things that happened, right? I mean, that would be rough. We get past chapter 2 and be like, "Woo, we gotta put that down and come back."
Which is exactly the reason why so many people don't start life story writing, because they don't feel good about themselves. So that's part of my mission, is to help people feel good about the life they've lived.
Well, I'm guessing that they remember, just like I was saying, they remember more of the negative than they remember of the positive. So it could be really dreadful if we didn't have someone like you to help them relook. And the word that I use is reperspectivize. I know it's not a real word, but reperspectivize what it is that they've actually been through, and not just the ickiness of it and the horrible feelings, but being able to really claim that is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, I think it's a distinction between my life story writing programs and others. So many just provide prompts, but they don't guide people to go deeper and to really search for the wisdom that they've gained over the years and provide the story underneath it all.
Mm-hmm. Which is the work.
It's compelling. Yeah. That's where you make it. That's where you inspire others. That's where you make a connection with others.
That's where you inspire others, make a connection with others, for sure. Yeah, I love that you can do that you can get underneath it, because there is really beautiful. I mean, as far as all the personal work we've done, we know that if you actually go through the story, especially with somebody who is skilled facilitator, that we can get a little deeper, and there's usually really beautiful stuff underneath there if we really look at it just from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I've seen you in action doing that, and you're really good at that.
And it's not about silver linings. I was just writing a piece today that I just want to make sure that we understand. This isn't about just fluffing ourselves up and trying to make ourselves feel good. This is about truly finding persistence that we put in, the energy that we put into it, the survival tactics that we may have brought up in order to get through it, right? There's like real lessons and real beauty in it. It's not about just saying, oh, well, I'm sure it's for the best. I hate when people say stuff. Let's figure out why it is.
Exactly. I know. It's like the stories that people write and say, well, we went through a very difficult time, but we made it through. Well, tell us about that difficult time.
Right? Like, what did you do? You had to do something. Like, even if it was just like holding space for it, like, I want to know what it felt like and how you conquered getting through that. I mean, we act like it's just like luck again, that we just survived it. Even though I did stupid things, I just survived it because I was lucky. And it's like, no, hey, you had a part in that.
Excavate. Exactly.
Yeah. Beautiful. So let's go to the last self. What is the last self that we have? So
the last one kind of pulls it all together. It's self-acceptance. And And I know that for you in your program, you use archetypes. So we've got all these different parts of ourselves. And as we're doing our life story writing, we start to see these different parts of ourselves, you know, our adolescent and our lover and our, you know, our sovereign in these different, you know, how we show up in these different roles. And so it's looking and saying, oh yeah, I'm accepting all of these attributes. I'm both what I consider to be both my positive and negative ones, and accept that haven't always been my best self. And at the same time, I showed up the best that I could at that point in time, where I made bad choices, knowing I was making bad choices, but I've got wisdom now. I can look back and go, well, I know I would not do it like that, you know, and there's been moments where I've just kicked ass. And so it's just embracing all of who we are and feeling at peace with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the archetypes for me really help the self-acceptance, because I was one of those people who have all the voices going on in my head, like, I should do that. No, you shouldn't. You should wait. You should not do that. You should go hide under a rock. Right. And I couldn't understand how would I ever accept myself if I'm always doing something wrong according to some part of myself, right? Like I'm not doing it right. And what I started to understand is I have all these different roles within me, and they all want something different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's natural for them, right? The warrior wants to go get stuff done. They don't want to sit around with the lover and like just connect and see the beautiful things. And when we pull them apart that way, we can honor them all for their missions. They each have their own specific purpose. Just like and together they come together, and that's what makes up us. So if we can pull apart all those different energies, we can start seeing why we're doing what we're doing. Oh, right. My warrior was up when I should have really been listening and holding space for that person. Right. Or my child was up because I was wounded. And so I started, fighting back or screaming to be heard. That's what my inner child likes to do. So because I didn't feel like I was being heard, and all of a sudden I popped right back into my inner child, and I started screaming to be heard rather than sitting in my queen, right? Where I could be like, I could listen, I could converse. And so self-acceptance is I believe anyway, I don't want to take this away from you, but it's really just accepting our humanness, that stuff's going to happen that we don't want to happen. We're going to do things that we don't want to do. We're going to hurt people when we don't want to hurt them. We're going to get hurt when other people don't intend us to get hurt. And that's just part of our humaning. And the acceptance part is, for me, is how am I showing up, and how, that's how we move forward from these things, is like, how do I want to show up, and how can I do that?
Yeah. And in just talking in terms of showing up, there is one more self that I've thought about since coming up with the 4 selves.
Ooh, we got a bonus self.
We get a bonus self. Well, it's self-respect. And self-respect is feeling good about the way we show up, and knowing that we're worthy, and treating ourselves in that way. And I connected with thinking about, self-respect is in there too, because I came across an article that Joan Didion, the author, wrote in Vogue magazine in 1961. So this, Vogue's been a fashion magazine. And I think this article, it was on self-respect. And I think it was one of the, if not the first article that was more psychology kind of.
Okay. Like a self-helpy kind of thing.
Yeah. Back in 1961, there wasn't a whole bunch of self-help talk going on out there. Right. But she said that innocence ends when one is stripped of the delusion that one likes oneself. Innocence ends when one is stripped of the delusion that one likes oneself. And she says that it's a matter of misplaced self-respect. So it's like, okay, that, I think where she went with that is that character, she goes, character is the willingness to accept responsibility for one's own life. It's a source from which self-respect springs. So when I think of these things that we've talked about, the self-awareness, the self-compassion, the self-appreciation, the self-acceptance, that we have self-respect for who we are as a person. We get to that place of like, okay, I can make choices about how I behave. I can appreciate that I'm worthy, and I can be in character, I can be of character, and be responsible for my life. And that then can kind of just pulls it all together to me as far as, now I can operate from a place of self-respect. And I think that's helpful in moving forward with all that we've gained from this self-reflection experience.
Yes, I love that. And last week's podcast was about external validation, which I think self-respect is the perfect antidote to needing that external validation, because we get to really like who we are and be like, well, that's respectable and admirable. And so we get to the point where we don't really need other people to validate us. I mean, whether it's positive or negative, we're just good with where we are and how we're showing up. And that's really, I mean, now that you say that, that's really the whole point of my program, is to get people to the point where they really like the way they're showing up for themselves. They're liking how they're showing up for their relationships. They like how they show up in the world. And and it's beautiful. And I love that both of our programs work on this from slightly different angles. That's all. Like, it's really, I can imagine the joy on someone's face, going through your program, writing their book and finishing it and being like, wow, I'm a pretty cool chick. I mean, it wasn't perfect, wasn't beautiful, but no story is, we would get bored with a main character who did everything right all the time and everything worked out right. Where would the story be?
Right. You're right. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Like, people will go, I feel good. I had a pretty darn good life, or I've had a pretty darn good life, or, I have fallen in love with myself finally. And that's like, oh my gosh, that's music to my ears.
Right. I mean, that's the whole point. I know one of my clients once said, I really like me. Like, I would be friends with me. I would go hang out with me. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, of course, that's where we want everybody to be, don't we?
This past weekend, I was working on editing some of the tutorials that I've done. I'm getting my self-guided program in place. So I was going back and watching things that I've done, and it's been a while since I've seen some of these, and I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm enjoying this. Like, I was enjoying my own teaching. I was like, okay, I'm good.
I've done that too before, especially like on the podcast, when I'm like, I have conversations like this and I'm like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. We'll just see, and then I'm like, oh, I probably sounded stupid, or I was stuttering. And then I'm like listening to it later. I'm like, actually, this is okay. This is all right. Why am I so judgmental? Like,
it's such a weird feeling, right? We've just been so conditioned to not do that. So it's like, oh, am I really feeling this way?
Right. Because I'm only worried about the 2 or 3 things I thought I might have done wrong, but there could be like 60 things that I'm doing really great. And I'm like, wow, hold on. Did I forget about all the other work I put into this and why it's working out so well now? Yeah. Well, beautiful. Thank you so much. So we have the 4 selves. The original 4 was self-awareness, for anybody listening, self-compassion, self-appreciation, and self-acceptance. And then our bonus one is self-respect, which is like, I think, at the top of that pyramid. Like, if we build this foundation with these other 4, that 5th one just kind of shows up. And I love that. And it's a completely different feeling. And I want anybody listening to know that if you think that it's impossible for you, Joanna and I both want to show you how it can be possible. So reach out and we will respond back, because I really think we both have really great programs, slightly different purposes and whatnot, but they both address all 5 of these. And that's why I was so excited to have you on to talk about them, because I think that they're really important. And I said to a client the other day, I go, I wish we were more narcissistic. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, imagine a world where we all were concerned about working on ourselves and doing our own selves, like not being arrogant, obviously, but like being really into who am I? How am I showing up in the world? How am I showing up for my relationships? And that would make us, all these selves just reintroduce that to me, is that, yes, the self-work, that's the most important work. That'll impact everything around you.
Yeah. And like you said, it just brings it to wholeness. Yeah. That, because we all have some of these going on at different points in time, but to be really balanced and have them all operating can bring such a feeling of wholeness.
And you have a freebie below. I want you just to tell me a little bit about it so that people will click on it and find out some good stuff for themselves.
Sure. Yeah. My website is journeytolegacy.com, and I have a free gift there. It's a free guide for those who are curious about life story writing, and it's so much easier than memoir. There's not all this requirements to have story arc and structure and all the things that people have to worry about if they want to get published. This is really to take you through the process of starting to look at your own life and thinking about how you can connect the dots, how you can feel good about the life you've lived and the years ahead and the legacy you have to leave behind.
Yeah, so, I love this. I love that program because it's about what happened to me so that I can, and you say legacy, so I can leave along for my kids to read someday, because I'm sure that there's things that parents have never shared with their kids. And so that's lost information once I'm gone. And it's a way to really write the story without feeling like you have to be a fiction writer. like where's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and it doesn't matter. It's just the way that you write it is perfect.
Yes. I really guide people to trust their intuition and inspiration. Like all the different tutorials I see out there on memoir writing are really about helping people get published, and that's not. And you don't have to have kids to do this. I mean, really, the number one purpose, first purpose, is feeling good about your own life and getting those 4 selves, now the 5 selves, in place. And at that point, then you get to choose, where do you want to go with it? Maybe you do want to write memoir. Maybe you do want to share it. Maybe you do have people, family to share it with. But you need to have that foundation of feeling good about the life you've lived before you're ready to do that.
Right. And you might write it and go, nobody else needs to know about this. I just needed that. Right. I mean, I'm sure that can happen where you're just like, wow, no, I feel like it's almost like I validated myself. I don't need anybody else to see this now. So either way, but writing it down will help us at least feel better about the life that we lived. And it really brings me back to what is true and beautiful about my life. So how can we write this love story about ourselves? Thank you, Joanna, so much for coming back on and discussing this with me. I think these are so important topics. And I think that it's going to be really helpful for people to think about and where they are on each of these selves and how they can get further. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for all the beautiful work you're doing in the world.
Oh, thank you. All right. Hey, one more thing. When we are all more confident and full of self-love, we can act more intentionally and mindfully. What would a world like that look like? I want to know. One way that you can help me with this vision is to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you listen to it. It helps more than you know, and it's just a few clicks to help me create a more beautiful world. And as always, remember to be gentle with your humanness.